Going, shall we?
Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Morning, everybody. Let me just go fix the lights over here. Hey, Miles. Morning, everybody. Hey, Chris. All right, good morning, Tracy and Nancy and Kate and Karen and Jean. Hey, everybody. Nothing's just extra dim today. I think it's just me. That's all just me. Hey, Jerry, hey, Timothy, Mary. Anybody I might be missing? Cindy, Karen, Kate.
In the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's
Hey, Lisa, Heather, and Susan. Good morning all around. Hey, Susan and Becky. Hey, Lisa. Morning all around. Hey, Luann. Hey, Martin. Hey, everybody. Morning, Octavio. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Cesare in Poland. All right. Hey, Londa. Yes, it is Sunday. That's your fun day. Well, I have to run day, but my tours have to run day. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Julianne. Been going through notes, getting set up for some new walking tours for this year. We starting that up before we know it, you know. I want to refresh the gangster talk up a little bit. I want to do up a bit more of the ghost tour downtown. Maybe I'll do some more. So people keep asking me about ghost tours. Constantly asked about ghost tours. Hey, Steve. Maybe I should keep doing some ghost tours. Hey, Kathy in Arkansas. Look who's here. Making his contractual appearance. Mr. Miles. Sit down. Is my computer plugged in? Oh yeah, I'm plugged. All right. Yeah, I want to mix things up a little bit more this year, and particularly expand on tours that I've already done. I mean, that Find a Grave in Rose Hill yesterday was right on the regular walking tour route. So was the other guy that we found in the middle of that, the theatrical manager, whom I got to be able to find more data. There's not a ton on him personally inside of the book about her that came out about 10 years ago. The Little Georgia Magnet, Dixie Haygood. But you know, those of you on Find a Grave, we found that grave for the theatrical manager of the Little Georgia Magnet. I remember when I lived in Milledgeville, Georgia, there was some story about a witch buried somewhere there who performed weird feats in front of the crowned heads of Europe. Now, it turns out that was the Little Georgia Magnet, whose manager is buried right here. Hey, Emily. Hey, Steve. Hey, Timothy. Yeah, I'm working on, the trick is with the ghost tours, the walking route I used to do is not really tenable these days with some of the changes to the street structure for more outdoor dining. So I'm trying to like make it an all loop experience. Well, there have been many good witches in Georgia. Amanda May Haley. Annie Abbott. But now we got Bad witches. We got good witches and bad witches, right? Hey, Diane. Hey, Karen. Octavia, yeah. Hey, Kathleen. But, you know, we've also got that Lost Vice Districts. I could do like a whole tour of Lost Vice Districts. Lost Loop Vice Districts. That could be really interesting. Adam, I know lots of Wiccans in Atlanta. Just a lot of them. Or I did, I don't know as many people. I don't know if they're all still there. The ones I knew 20 years ago. Now, you know, today I was going to do the boat tour, but then Eventbrite wouldn't let me put up a listing like an hour ahead of time. So, I moved it to, I just had it be next week as well. I've already got like 4 or 5 pre-orders on it, which is really unusual these days. I've already made more on that tour than I do on a lot of them these days. Karen, the fire for one thing. Gentrification, that's another. They're not all quite walking distance from each other, though. I might have to, like, incorporate it into a gangster tour. Yeah, I could do that. So you got the Rialto district. That leads to the tunnel down to where Jake Lingle was killed. There's also Hair Trigger Blocks. There's a lot you can cover there. All my fart. It also takes you right close to, if not right by, the place where the Moran gang was operating a business called the Acme Seamless Paper Tube Company. This was before Acme just made it sound made up. It was already on the border. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Diane. Hey, Bob. Also, I'm going to experiment with the thing. You know, with prices going up everywhere, I've been thinking now and then. I tried a little bit last year, raising the price up to $22 from $20 for a walking tour. But maybe I could do, like, Patreon discount.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk. Benny Goodman.
Hey, Gladys. Hey, Carolyn's mom over on Twitch. And Todd on Twitch. Where did Chicago rank among big cities? It was heading rapidly towards being the second city in those days. It kind of reached that around, depends on when in the Vice District area we're talking about. But did it rank among Vice in other cities? I don't think we were much different. It's like, our crime is not unique. Our crime is not a bigger deal than other places. Our corruption is not unique. Maybe in the 1920s, we were ranked like number 46 in murders. That's about where we stand now. Like the top 30 were all in the South. Hey, Ann. Miles was in my arms a minute ago. He's gone for a walk now, which is probably for the best. I spent my morning choring. Somebody at the event yesterday asked me about the mysterious Chicago dinners, so I guess we really need to get going on those too. But yeah, lots of new stuff this year. I'll definitely still be focusing mostly on cemetery tours. That's still where my heart is. But Graceland's tricky this year with all the construction. That's going to be going on until about August. But I want to start getting schedules up and going, you know? Up ahead of time this year. Hey, Susan. Like, maybe experiment with having a few of them, like, months in advance.
They all loved it. They all loved those passes when they played by And now another
which is not typical for me.
Rosetta.
Hey, Marita. Hey, Dad. Sunny day on the beach. And Mom, same thing. You all saw my parents sent me these sweet polka albums, right? Like Jimmy Savatsky, I Can't Stop Doing the Polka, featuring two accordions. This is like a real accordion attack band. And you know that all of these guys have sweet wood-paneled walled rec rooms in their basements. All of them. I was thinking, if you could like carve a tunnel from Morton Grove to the lake, how many wood panel rec rooms would you go through? There's like be like a whole feed like on like rec rooms of Zillow. Another idea. Oh yeah, polkas are a blast. I've only got like one polka song in my catalog of songwriting called Lucy Loves Lincoln. It's about getting ditched for the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. Oh, she wants someone who has tunnels and high schools that bear his name. Basement on 63rd. Yeah, I don't know if I remember. Yeah, I don't think I was ever in that one. I feel like I was in that house once when there was an open house there for some reason, and he took me through it. I have like very vague memories of that. I don't know if that's exactly what was going on that day. I remember our basement on 89th Street. Okay, we're gonna let Benny Goodman finish up this tune, then I will get started. Oh yeah, Chicago's own Polkaholics are one of the best times you can have in Chicago. And in fact, Jimmy Savitsky, this has got the Baby Doll Polka, which I've seen them do. You are my baby doll. You are my baby doll. You're my darling now.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
All right, there's Benny Goodman for us, ladies and gentlemen, coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Well, coming to you live on January 6th of 1936, so, 93. Coming to us live, give or take, 80-some-odd years. I can't do the math right now. But all right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Something I've been hearing a lot the last couple of days are, hey, man, I loved your tours during the pandemic. You should still do those sometimes. I don't know what to say as we're still here all the time. Sunday morning ones these days, as you know, I usually decide what to do morning of and don't put as much planning in, except for next week we're going to be doing the virtual boat tour, I know, and that one is already getting pre-orders, which is also a little bit unusual these days, but that's nice to see. So today I thought, I was about to do the boat tour, but then I realized, hey, we do have a mayoral election coming up this week, and, I know a guy who didn't vote one time. You know where he is now? He's dead. Now he wants you to vote. All right, I've realized I've only really done this tour once before, and it was way back over 2 years ago now. But most of the stuff is still in place, so I can go ahead and run it. Now, I always kind of worry about doing stuff like this, really anytime I do Chicago cemetery stuff, because some people are just going to swoop in and make, that's where the Democrats get all their votes, the cemeteries. When people say that on, like, one of those horrible police scanner feeds, anytime I get a picture retweeted by one of those guys, it's that same comment over and over. And I have the same GIF that I will always show, which is, it makes them so mad. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, just make sure you get out and vote this week. Look up who your candidates are in your neighborhood. Look up who's running for the alderperson in your neighborhood. Look up the various mayoral candidates who at least have a shot. And we'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting season. So probably not as interesting as it was back in 1899. We'll cover this a little bit. When the person up for mayor that year was Carter Harrison Jr. We're going to cover this in a little bit. He was a second-generation mayor of Chicago. His father, Carter Harrison, had been mayor for several different terms. That was back when terms were just a couple of years long, though. They are now at Graceland Cemetery. You can see how long ago I filmed this one, because now this has been totally cleaned up. This is a sparkling white monument now that looks absolutely brand new. To start with, let's cover a little bit of Carter Harrison Jr. So we're talking about the mayoral election of 1899. In the mayoral election of 1899, in the run-up towards that, there was this whole thing in the Chicago Daily Inter-Ocean. They decided that Harrison Jr. was running a colonization scheme in which he was importing what they called illegal voters from other cities to come vote for him. You can see here, this is a whole illustration of Harrison Jr. with Bathhouse John and Hinky Dink, the first ward alderman, pouring out their bag of vagabonds, tramps, and thieves, pickpockets, thugs, etc. Now, they had a lot of fun with this. They were accusing Harrison of everything up to and including murder. A guy was killed in a shootout downtown. They responded by saying that no, Harrison had arranged that because he was the one who was suspected of coming to us and telling all about this colonization scheme. Also, there was a guy beaten up, allegedly by Bathhouse John himself, right at City Hall. He was taken to a hospital, then moved to another hospital, and it was then said that he was actually been kidnapped and taken away before he could die so the Bathhouse's people could cover the whole thing up. He eventually turned up alive and well. Now, most fun of this is in the week or so building up to the election in 1899, the Inter-Ocean published a list every day of all of the people besides Bathhouse John and Hinky Dink Kenna who were working for the Harrison campaign. We'll just look at some of this. Besides the Harrison Bathhouse Hinky Dink gang, we've got Andrew Craig, the window smasher. He was a real guy. We've also got Sly Teddy, don't think he was real. Pat Manning, known as Ugly Pat. Fighting Dan, King of Pickpockets. Big Sam, Doc Watts. Francis Hathaway, Willie Davis, the Medicine Kid. 7-Up Jim. All of these guys, most of these guys only ever appear in the press in these particular lists from this particular week. Andy Craig, the window smasher, is a real guy. Most of the rest of these guys you can't find a single other thing about. And I can scroll up a little bit more. There's more of these guys. 16 Mule Pete. Howard Bishop, son of the housekeeper in Carrie Watson's place. Carrie Watson was not quite dead yet. She died shortly thereafter. Maybe cover her this week. Knockout Dan, Sassy Bill, Kid Barnett, Charles Harris, alias the Black Kid. And that's just the start. It keeps on going with Farmer Brown. Beware the wrath of Farmer Brown. Big Slim, St. Louis Kid, Kid Roach, Nobby Clark, Coconut Morrissey. They must have had so much fun making these names up. And this was before, about about a year before William Randolph Hearst even came to town. Bandhouse Tobin, not to be confused with Bathhouse John. William Molly Mott. Okay, Molly Mott was a real person, but she was definitely not the alien of William Malzacker, unless that suggests something very interesting here. We've also got Swede Johnson, the Texas Kid, all kinds of people. Now, in the end, they still insisted that he had brought in about 7,000 people. But the day after the election, they admitted he had won by about 30,000. They said that they had caught several people, including Chief Badenoch. Former police chief Badenoch had caught somebody trying to vote twice, which would be about the first time Chief Badenoch had ever caught anybody. But, they were fairly good sports about it. They still insisted he was doing all this illegal stuff, but they also admitted that it hadn't been enough to tip the election one way or the other. He had won fair and square. And really, just about the day after the election, they stopped talking about any of this stuff. Almost as though they were never really all that serious about it. Once again, he was a second-generation mayor in 1899. He was the son of Carter Harrison Sr., who had been mayor for quite a long time, and was subject to similar attacks by more progressive papers. Now, he and Harrison Jr. both had this kind of anything goes policy about things like, say, vice districts, or in Harrison Jr.'s case, like theater fire regulations. But this also ran afoul of people in the build-up to the election of 1893. The Chicago Journal published this article, Thieves on the Run, Thugs Flocking to Chicago from Every Quarter, Carter Harrison's nomination the primary cause, criminals alive to the prospects of a wide-open town, police powerless against the lawless crowds. And their tenor here was that if Carter Harrison was elected, then in time for the World's Fair, every pickpocket, thief, and murderer would be coming to Chicago. You can't accuse this company of having been soft on crime. Though, to their credit, when Carter Harrison was eventually assassinated right before the election, but right before the end of the World's Fair, they didn't say, "We told you so." At that point, they really changed their tone. It was only now that he's gone that we realize how much his spirit was a part of our lives, bone of our bones, sinew of our sinew. It's similar to, I'll just cover this jerk really quickly. Like when Wilbur F. Story, the anti-Lincoln guy from the Chicago Times, after Lincoln was assassinated, they really just kind of admitted, well, he's gotten a lot better lately, hadn't he? And there was a little bit about saying, well, of course, what John Wilkes Booth did was wrong, but what about John Brown? Well, we all know what I think of this dude. Oh, the GIF is missing. That's probably for the best. But in that particular election, I'm kind of going out of order, just sliding all over the thing here. It's kind of fun. In that election of 1899, there were three candidates running. There was Harrison was running as a Democrat. Some guy I can't remember was running as a Republican offhand. And there was also a third-party candidate, previously a Democrat, who never really fit in with the Democrats of that era, John Altgeld, our former governor from a few years before. Now, Altgeld is an interesting case. Now, in general, from about 1855 up until Theodore Roosevelt, generally speaking, the Republicans were the more progressive party. Democrats usually refer to themselves as conservative. You see a lot of people making hay about this online and trading on people just not realizing that. When I read 1850s newspapers and Civil War era newspapers and 1880s newspapers, if I side with either of them, it's almost always the Republicans. The Democrats were very much like modern conservatives. It's all white grievance and conspiracy theories. Altgeld was a very interesting case at the time. He was a progressive Democrat at a time when that was very rare, and baffled people of both parties with his complaints that under this system, the rich just get richer and the poor just get poorer. So, on his grave here at Graceland Cemetery, most famously, he pardoned the Haymarket anarchists. We'll cover those guys in a second. The Haymarket thing was a bomb had gone off during a rally while the cops were marching on it, pointing guns at everybody. They never really figured out who threw the bomb, but just arrested 8 people on general principles, and 5 of them were sentenced to be executed. 4 of them were, one died by suicide beforehand, and his word was, if the defendants had a fair trial, there ought to be no interference, for no punishment under our laws could then be too severe. But they did not have a fair trial. The evidence utterly fails to connect the unknown who threw the bomb with the defendants, and I am convinced that it is my duty to act. In fact, some of these people were not even present at the time. And nobody said that they were. There's also him trying to stop the president from sending in the troops to put down the Pullman strike. And this great line from towards the end of his life, this is usually said to be his last words, though it's a little too practiced. I am not discouraged. Things will right themselves. The pendulum swings one way and then another, but the steady pull of gravitation is toward the center of the earth. Any structure must be plumb if it is to endure. So it is with nations. Wrong may seem to triumph, right may seem to be defeated, but the gravitation of eternal justice is toward the throne of God. Any political institution which is to endure must be plumb with the line of justice. And one other. The doctrine that might makes right has covered the earth with misery. While it crushes the weak, it also destroys the strong. Every deception, every cruelty, every wrong reaches back sooner or later and crushes its author. Justice is moral health, bringing happiness. Wrong is moral disease, bringing moral death. It's an interesting thing. This is a very rare instance of a Democrat from the 1890s that I might very well have voted for myself back then. It's very unusual for me to see that from before about the 1930s or so. Over the course of between about Altgeld and Franklin D. Roosevelt, the parties gradually shifted and switched, as these things go. Let's check out the Haymarket guys. These guys are actually out in Forest Home. There is a giant monument to them. We'll move up over to here. Forest Home, there's this whole area here known as the Radical section. Mainly for this. But this is Haymarket. I always like that guy down at the bottom was like, oh, look what the time. I better be going. They were giving a rally for the 8-hour workday. Well, gradually speaking, some people at the McCormick plant had been striking. One of them had been killed by a police officer. Mayor Harrison showed up at this on a horse, rode around a little bit and said, "No, this is fine. Police, go home. They're just giving speeches." But then the second for the permit for the rally expired, the cops started marching towards it, pointing guns at everybody. Some unknown person threw a bomb. And as a result, 4 of them ended up being hanged, even though, well, 4 of the people vaguely connected to it, including Mr. Albert Parsons right here. Let's move in a little bit. This was a speech one of them had on the gallows. "The day will come when our silences will be more telling than the voices you are throttling today." That was one thing they said on the scaffold. Now, most guys, they expect you to be what they called game on the gallows. When they walked you out to be hanged, you were supposed to make a speech about how sorry you were. These guys went to their graves shouting slogans, singing songs, singing Annie Laurie, which seems like an odd choice to me. I'll move over there from there just a little bit. We'll move over. There's some typos on this one. But just over a little ways away is Emma Goldman, notable radical anarchist, who they tried to connect to all kinds of people who were involved in, like, the McKinley assassination. There's a whole thing like "Scour the City" for Emma Goldman around that time. Also, we just talked about Albert Parsons of the Haymarket. He got married while he was in prison to a woman named Lucy Parsons. Very interesting person herself. She is sometimes said to have been born enslaved. I don't think that's actually true. She denied it herself anyway. The timeline about works out that she could have been. Her ethnic makeup is kind of a question mark, generally said to be mostly Native American, I think, though what she said and what the records say were not always in line with each other. But she remained an activist for a very long time afterwards, all up through the end of her life. Now, by 1942, when she died, this was like nearly 60 years, more than half a century after the Haymarket affair, but it was still a pretty common topic in Bughouse Square, the place in Washington Square Park where people would stand up on soapboxes and make speeches. On a particularly busy night, as many as 5,000 people would cram into this park to listen to and heckle all of the speakers. It was a pretty wild scene by all accounts. It's very much like YouTube comments come to life, is what it was. And early in his autobiography, Studs Terkel, the great Chicago writer, remembers going to see Lucy Parsons giving a speech at Bughouse Square. That's just amazing to me, that somebody I went to go see speak also went to see Lucy Parsons speak. It's amazing how closely connected we still are to history, so much more so than we think. And speaking of these guys, I'll zip this one ahead a little bit. In Graceland Cemetery is a guy by the name of Ernst Schmidt, who worked on the Haymarket guy's defense. He was what was known as a 49er. There was a failed liberal uprising in Germany in 1849 and ended up with a lot of people being exiled. He ended up moving here in time to get involved with things like the Underground Railroad. He also became probably the most respected radical anarchist in town. Now, this prairie-style monument to him is kind of built against his wishes. He very specifically said he didn't want a funeral. He thought all these things like showing the grief of the widow was absolutely barbaric, a relic of old-fashioned values and virtues. He wanted an unmarked grave. That's in tune with being a radical. But his son, Richard, was an architect who designed this monument for him, in addition to designing things like the Schoenhofen Pyramid. Also the Wrigley Mansion down in the Lincoln Park area. All right, I've just been hopping around here. I didn't even, normally in this one I open with this one that I found again recently over at Calvary. This is Hannah Hanley, Chicago's oldest woman voter as of the early 1920s. Now, women got the vote in Chicago a little bit earlier than they got nationally. In certain local elections, women have been voting in Chicago. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but there's women in the voter rolls from the 1880s. You can find the woman that H.H. Holmes bought a pharmacy from in the voter rolls from 1888. 2 years after he is supposed to have killed her. The oldest woman voter interested in public affairs. I love this headline. Mrs. Hanley, 94, says she will cast her ballot for beer. Now, this was a referendum in the early 1920s where they were asking about whether beer should be allowed in Chicago again. This was during Prohibition. A federal constitutional amendment was blocking the sale of alcohol. But in Chicago, it was generally agreed. What she said was, I do not use alcohol, but I believe the working man should have his beer if he wants it. And the ordinance passed overwhelmingly in Chicago. But you can't overrule a federal constitutional amendment with a local vote. So it lingered on for a while, and so did Hannah Hanley. This is a picture of her at 94. Now here she is in 1930. Aged women registered to cast ballots. And here she is at 101, voting on West Monroe Street. And this would be, 1930 would be her last election. Well, Sherry, she's not voting anymore. This thing about dead people voting in Chicago, you could get away with that a little bit back in like the 70s and 80s. After computers, it was a lot harder to do stuff like that. Hannah Hanley, I love that one. One of my favorite microfilm finds. I was bumping into her. And in her same cemetery is Bathhouse John, one of the real people who definitely was involved in the Carter-Harrison campaign. He was organizing dances and fundraisers for him, featuring all of the great characters of the levee. And also the fees that they were taking from gamblers and stuff were said to be working for his re-election campaign, which is definitely not really okay. But here's Bathhouse John. Later in life, Bathhouse John was a first ward alderman, held various local positions like that. Now, this was the guy down in the first ward who was making sure that thieves and murderers got off the hook. He was the best friend of the criminals that was involved in any manner of corruption, but he was such a goofball that people just kind of had a soft spot for him. Later in life, he was regarded as really kind of a no account by the rest of the local politicians, so they would give him jobs like promoting Straw Hat Day. He would write whole poems about how now it is Straw Hat Day. Now men can switch to straw hats and they won't be so hot. Here he is in the mirror practicing taking his hat off and on like a big boy. Perhaps his worst offense, though, is his poetry and his songs. His big hit was a song called Dear Midnight of Love. He also wrote songs such as Why'd They Make Lake Michigan So Wide, So Awful Wide? She Sleeps by the Side of the Drainage Canal. Ode to a Bowl of Soup. Ode to a Bathtub. Maybe Ode to a Bowl of Soup is Pickwick Papers. In any case, no, that's Ode to an Expiring Frog, which would have been about as good as these. A newspaper reporter later claimed that he was the one who did all of the writing, which is probably possible, but it also comes from an era when newspaper writers were claiming to have invented pretty much everything that ever happened. If there's one thing less reliable than turn-of-the-century newspapers, it's mid-century newspaper memoirs. Now let's move on a little bit more. Let's go see a mayor. I've got so many things just packed into this one that I can kind of pick and choose and bounce around. So this massive obelisk at Rose Hill Cemetery is for Long John Wentworth, a guy I have difficulty sometimes in even saying which story to tell about this guy. But when he was a mayor in the 1850s, he was the guy who swept through and tore down the Sands, one of our vice districts of the time. Also, he'd been in Congress. It is because of him that he resisted Wisconsin's attempts to lower their border by 50 miles and absorb Chicago, offering him to make him the senator of Wisconsin. We have also got, I also just want to cover his obelisk. He very specifically spent a lot of time on his deathbed planning his monument. He specifically did not want his name on it, though his heirs intervened in that one and put his name on there. He wanted it to be just blank, so people would say, wow, whose is that? And they'd go ask at the office, who's that big obelisk for? And they'd say, why, that is John Wentworth. And off to the library they would go, which, of course, works very well on people like me. I don't know about anybody else. But again, he wanted very specifically the largest obelisk that he could possibly get, which, this being before Sigmund Freud. I don't think it's a coincidence that obelisks like this went out of fashion around the time people became aware of the works of Sigmund Freud. But while we're talking about mayors with names like Long John, we also, of course, had Big Bill. who was down at Oakwood Cemetery along with his father, who had one of the best bits of facial hair in the city. He saw Chester A. Arthur and said, "Yeah, hold my beer." But Big Bill was the mayor in the 1920s, one of the more famously corrupt. He started out great. He was a great progressive mayor in the early days. He had the tools for greatness. But he was also he was also said to be taking money from Al Capone, like a lot of people were at the time. Then he just got into absolute buffoonery. When he was running in the 20s and the early 30s, he would stage debates where it would just be him and then a couple of caged rats with the names of his opponents. He went on a really big tear in his last election about being anti-British. He started blaming everything on the King of England. Said if the King of England ever comes over here, I'm going to punch him in the snoot. He started burning library books that he thought were too pro-British. This was really just kind of a ploy to get the Irish and German votes, but I always have to cover. Now, the Chicago Tribune was a Republican paper, and he was a Republican mayor. In fact, our last Republican mayor. But the Tribune said William Hale Thompson was defeated Tuesday. The election was a dirty job, but Chicago has washed itself and put on clean clothes. It is always is an unpleasant business to eject a skunk, but someone had to do it. For Chicago, Thompson has meant filth, corruption, obscenity, idiocy, and bankruptcy. He has given the city an international reputation for moronic buffoonery, barbaric crime, triumphant hoodlumism, unchecked graft, and a dejected citizenship. In his attempt to continue this, he excelled himself as a liar and defamer of character. He's out. He's not only out, but he is dishonored. He is deserted by his friends. He is permanently marked by the evidence of his character and conduct. His health is impaired by his ways of life, and he leaves office and goes from the city the most discredited man who ever held place in it. I always feel like I need a cigarette after that. But he was defeated in his election by Anton Cermak. And he tried to say, we're going to have a World's Fair. You really think we can have a World's Fair with a mayor with a name like Cermak? Not short on the Polish jokes at the time. Now, shortly after his election, though, Cermak, as mayor, would have been, if the buck stopped with him, he would have been responsible for a raid in the LaSalle Wacker building early in 1933 that nearly killed Frank the Enforcer Nitti. Now, not too long later, in February of 33, Cermak was making appearances with President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt. Somebody fired on Roosevelt but accidentally shot Cermak instead. There are those who say that it was not accidental. It was really just somebody not aiming for Roosevelt at all, but specifically trying to get Cermak, making it look like they were going for Roosevelt, but really getting revenge for the raid on the LaSalle Wacker building. Strikes me as unlikely. You can see he lingered for quite a while. The next day, it looks like hopes were increasing. Meanwhile, James Corbett, ring idol of the 1890s, was dying. And Hart makes Cermak chance 50-50, it said. Then it looked like a fighting chance. Pain is less. And we can also see here at the top, this being 1933, Capone effort to influence judge charged. Well, no surprise there. And not according to Sondheim. I know there's a whole song about him and assassins. I haven't seen it myself. Well, let's move on a little bit to John Jones, the first black man in Chicago to hold elective office. Now, he came to Chicago. He was never enslaved. He was born what was called a free person of color. Came to Chicago. LCP Freer helped him get the papers to establish that. Also taught him to read and taught him to write. He became very good at that. There was a picture of him here. Where did that go? I should get that. Hang on one second. I'll find it. So the last time I did this was a couple of years ago. So hence, sometimes things disappear. If I've moved it since 2 years ago. This'll do. Here we go. Worked on the Underground Railroad himself, was a good friend of Frederick Douglass. Used to take out ads in Frederick Douglass's newspaper saying, if you escape and end up in Chicago, here's my address, come on and I'll help you out. But most famously, perhaps, is around the end of the Civil War, he started a campaign against the black laws of Illinois. There were all these laws in the books, like you could be black in the state, but you had to put up $1,000 bond. All sorts of different rules and regulations that Chicagoans would brag that they were never enforced in Chicago. Probably patting themselves on the back a little bit too much. But he started a campaign to have these repealed. The Chicago Tribune published it in full and agreed that these are horrible, unconstitutional, and idiotic laws. And they were, in fact, repealed right around the time that the Civil War ended. Who else we got here? Take a quick one. I've never found a really good story about Mayor Augustus Garrett, who was a mayor in 1836, one of our first mayors here in Chicago. Again in 1843, died in 1848, so one of our first mayors to die. This is a monument at Rose Hill that would have been moved over from the old city cemetery in Lincoln Park. Another early mayor up at Graceland, Joseph Medill, who was a mayor under the Fireproof Party after the Great Chicago Fire. But also always a political guy himself. You know, people tend to imagine now that there was some golden age where newspapers weren't political. They just gave you the facts. This is really amusing to anybody who actually reads a lot of old newspapers. They wore their endorsements and their affiliations quite literally on their sleeve, and Medill would personally take credit for getting Abraham Lincoln the nomination in 1860. It's difficult to overstate what a wild card that was. The convention was meeting in Chicago to nominate a candidate. Everybody went in kind of assuming it was going to be William Seward. Lincoln had been a junior House of Representatives nobody like 15 years, like 10, 20 years, years before. I never remember the right number to put right there. But he had been a junior house nobody for a while and now was just a famous speaker. We'd had a couple of presidents who were born poor by then, but, you know, these people who were born in things like log cabins by the time of their election, they were famous generals, they were famous governors. Lincoln was nothing like that. His nomination was completely out of left field due to a lot of really expert maneuvering. Really, the strategy was, if your first choice doesn't make it, make Lincoln your second choice. And this was buoyed, that being Chicago, by the fact that ever since at least May, the Chicago Tribune had been endorsing him right on their front page. The winning man, Abraham Lincoln. Presenting Abraham Lincoln to the National Republican Convention as a candidate for the presidency, we are actuated not by our great love and esteem for the man, by any open or secret hostility to any other eminent gentleman named for that high office, nor by a feeling of state pride or Western sectionalism, but by a profound and well-matured conviction that his unexceptionable record, his position between the extremes of opinion in the party, his spotless character as a citizen, and his acknowledged ability as a statesman will, in the approaching canvass, give him an advantage before the people which no other candidate can claim. Rather long-winded they were in those days. But this is way before the convention. I believe it was certainly the first major newspaper to make this endorsement. And the fact that the convention took place in the city where this had been going on is probably the only place Lincoln could have gotten the nomination. But he did, and Medill was only too happy to take all the credit for it. But not entirely wrongly. Same election wave that pushed him into office also pushed in Lincoln's friend, now, Susan, they didn't know he could fly pianos yet. That was a skill he came up with while in office. Okay, I'll keep this picture up a little bit earlier, so you can come up with some cracks like, look, if that's supposed to be you, Isaac, it's really bad. So Isaac Newton Arnold was elected to Congress in the same electoral wave. He had been working in a lot of Underground Railroad-related cases around the city in the decade or so before. He was a law partner of all kinds of eminent people in Chicago. E.C. Larned, who made speeches against the fugitive slave law that were reprinted for years and years and years. As a member of Congress, he got to know Lincoln a little better and wrote a lot of what we know about Lincoln in office. A lot of the personal anecdotes come from books that Isaac Newton Arnold wrote himself. Also, while in office, he introduced not only the bill that finally established once and for all, no, we will not be expanding slavery into any new territories, but also introduced the bill that would have outlawed slavery outright. The first time anybody had done that. It took till into the middle of the Civil War for that to happen. And it was a couple of months too early. It didn't pass, but it helped lay the groundwork for the 13th Amendment just a few months later. This was a time when the parties, again, were not exactly in flux, but a lot of people were still holding on to, like, the old ways. Like, people in the 1990s when Georgia, well, you met a lot of Democrats in Georgia who were really, really conservative back then, because they were old-time Democrats. They were still from back in the olden days. You had that same thing happen in Chicago when Mayor Francis Sherman was a Democratic mayor during the Civil War, but at the time that party was kind of split between the War Democrats and the Peace Democrats. You had the War Democrats like Sherman, who insisted that we should finish fighting this war. Then you had the peace guys who thought that we should just surrender and let the South do what they wanted. Francis Sherman had originally been mayor of Chicago for a one-year term back in 1841, came back 20 years later. Now, in that election in 1860, the first mayoral election he was in, his opponent was Thomas Barber Bryan, who was the founder of Graceland Cemetery. Now, it was a very, very close election. After it was called, a lot of Bryan's friends urged him to contest the results. It was just that close. But Bryan honestly didn't really want to be mayor anyway. And even like the Republican paper said, well, if it's got to be a Democrat, we're glad that it's at least Francis Sherman. He's an okay guy. And perhaps to show that there were no hard feelings, right after the election, Francis Sherman bought this massive plot right here at Graceland Cemetery. Let's see what else we got here. We got to cover Vice President Dawes, of course, up at Rose Hill Cemetery. Vice President Charles Dawes. I left this off of my tours for a long time, as I had to figure, who am I going to take here and say, this guy was vice president under Calvin Coolidge? Like, gee, interesting. But Charles G. Dawes was, in fact, a really interesting guy. He was initially a banker here in Chicago, also a songwriter. He wrote Melody in A Major, which became the melody for It's All in the Game. Only vice president to ever write a #1 pop song. One of only 2 members of Congress to write a #1 pop song, the other being Sonny Bono. Now, he was the author of the Dawes Plan that helped Europe from starving after World War I. Once brought in for a hearing about the bookkeeping during it, he shouted, "Hell and Maria, man, we were trying to win a war, not balance the books." This became his nickname, Helen Maria Dawes. When first elected as vice president, he gave his introductory speech as president of the Senate and just said, this institution is completely useless. If you don't get away with things like the filibuster, I might as well just go home and take a nap. One person described it as being another Helen Maria speech, but not so much with the Maria. Now, for his work on the Dawes Plan, he also won the Nobel Prize, making him one of 2 Nobel Prize winners to write a #1 pop song, the other being Bob Dylan, who had a #1 hit with the Byrds version of Mr. Tambourine Man. What have I got here? I don't know how good the video I've got of this one is, but over to the side of some of these is Oscar and Jessie DePriest, also Oscar DePriest's parents, who were born enslaved down in Alabama. Eventually, Oscar migrated his way up to Chicago, brought his parents along with him, and became Chicago's the first 20th century black congressman. After he was elected to Congress, his wife, Jessie, was invited to tea at the White House with Mrs. Hoover, along with a lot of the other congressional wives, as was the standard at the time. And she went without really thinking anything of it, but once word got out that this had happened, there was this absolute firestorm. And she always said, we just discussed the same things we would discuss after church. It was a lovely afternoon. All of this controversy has been drummed up afterwards. He was very polite about it. But really, to say that some controversy had been drummed up was putting it mildly. I mean, a lot of southern states were issuing formal condemnations of the events. The senator from Mississippi, who also authored the text of the 18th Amendment outlawing liquor, said, "I deplore this incident beyond measure. It is recognition of social equality between the black and white races and fraught with peril to civilization." He also said he would personally block Oscar DePriest from using the Senate bathroom. And Oscar said, "I wasn't planning to, but now I've got a mind to just go see if he's big enough." Oscar was having none of this. He said he would vote for no funding to support the 18th Amendment if they didn't have matching ones to support things like the 13th Amendment, the ones that outlawed slavery and established voting rights. We'll just let that hover there for a second. We'll move down to hers. A black alderman who got elected with help from Big Bill Thompson. These markers were added just fairly recently, I think, by a relative. Jesse is right next to him. What was I thinking when I filmed this day? Jesse DePriest, a gracious yet forceful civil rights advocate for black women during the White House tea incident, 1929. And it is now 10:40, but I'll throw in one more really quick. Who will it be? Who will it be? Just kind of scrolling through and picking. Who else can I have? Ebenezer Peck. Let's cover really quickly. The boulder here is for Ebenezer Peck, who served in state government with Abraham Lincoln after migrating down to Chicago from Montreal. And it used to show up for sessions dressed in a coonskin cap. It was in his mansion that Lincoln decided who was going to be the Secretary of State, etc. There's a Latin motto on the boulder that says something like, truth is more important than wealth, which is easy to say when you've got a mansion. There was also a huge rivalry between him and Long John Wentworth. They called each other just the nastiest names, even though they usually voted the same way. Very fierce rivalry. I'm looking into that one. My friend Scott knows a lot more about it than I do, but I will fill in the gaps in my knowledge of it very soon, I promise. So once again, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me for this one. Quick plug for some upcoming events. Wednesday night, we're still doing Wednesday nights for a couple more weeks, so as not to interfere with some friends who are doing Chicago for Chicagoans lecture series at Room 13. This Wednesday is going to be Strange Tales of the Gold Coast. I will have that event up on Facebook about a minute after we log off here. Then a Sunday, a week from today, tickets are already up, or the listing is already up for the virtual boat tour, and has already gotten more pre-orders than I normally get these days. So check it out. I haven't done the virtual boat tour in really quite a long time. Now, also coming soon, we're still working on this. I don't have any timeline yet, but we're working on some mysterious Chicago dinners. We're going to recreate historical restaurants in Chicago with vintage-inspired menus, if not actual vintage menus. And of course, our daily mini tours are still going on every day at 10 o'clock. If you're not getting notifications, try turning them off and back on again, or just be on at 10. I'm always there. On Fridays at 7 p.m., we've moved it to 7 p.m. now, but we do Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, talking about the events of the week, drinking whiskey, eating cookies, etc. With that, everybody, I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out for a bit. Thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. And here's Benny. Kristen, if we required vintage dress, I'm not sure we'd get enough people. But encourage, maybe we do like a discount for vintage costumes. Also might try, might bump up the cost of walking tours just slightly to keep in line with inflation. We're still way below the next leading brand, but maybe we could do like a Patreon discount. Like I bump it up 10%, but there's a 10% discount for all Patreon tiers. And of course, there's the whole Patreon tier where you get a free ticket every month, too. There's some slots open for that. Was William Butler Ogden a good mayor? Well, he got the city off the ground. I don't know if big city mayor is really a job that you can do well, honestly. We haven't had that many in Chicago. New York has also not had many good mayors. It's just kind of an impossible task. Adam, I think my walking tours are a little underpriced. I like undercutting the competition. I still do okay off of them. I tried raising them up to 22 or 23 last year, but it seemed like the sales were a little bit slower. Kirk, we're still working on venues for the dinners. That's one of the biggest X factors. Octavio, here's a secret. I lose track of Patreon ticket counts too. If you're on that tier and email me that you want to come, I don't really double check as to whether you've got enough. Whether you've accumulated enough. I don't think since like the first week I've ever turned anybody away from using a Patreon ticket. Audrey, yeah. Okay, if you want to bring a group, I might double check and make sure you've got enough. What mayoral candidate is going to win? Tough one. We're gonna be having a runoff for sure. From my point of view, the nightmare scenario is a Vallis versus Lightfoot runoff. I'm hoping to be Vallis versus Johnson or Garcia. Preferably Johnson on my end. Well, tell me that's one more than you need.
And that would put rhythm in the beat of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rang. Benny Goodman.
Thanks, Betsy.
Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Yeah, Nina, I don't think Lightfoot's going to break the top two. She's done some things that I thought were terrific, but also some things that were not. Yeah, I voted the other day. Plug my choices in. Aaron on YouTube asks, what was the name of the Chicago woman who hung out with Dizzy Gillespie? That would be Gertrude Abercrombie. Let me make, you know, my brain is kind of frazzled at the end of these things. Yeah, Gertrude Abercrombie. The Jazz Witch Painter. Yeah, there's not a lot of people that I love running for mayor. Honestly, it's amazing we can have this many candidates and still nobody I'm really enthusiastic about. Mayor of Chicago does not actually have the power to tax suburbanites. One can say that they should be. And in fact, I think DuPage County is about the only county that pays in more than they're getting back outside of Chicago. Now, Cindy, we've often done the hell we know and re-elect them as well. So often you just can't beat somebody with nobody, and they run nobody against somebody. My thing for the longest time is I'll just be basing on the polls, whichever of Garcia or Johnson seemed to have the best chance of coming in second and before the runoff. Oh yeah, let me go find where Miles is. There you are, Miles. All right, here's Mr. Miles. Now, don't write me in for a candidate. Please don't write me in. Miles been relaxing on the radiator this whole time. Ow!
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
I'm of the opinion that nobody can ever make a good big city mayor. Miles? How old is Miles? I think Miles is about to turn 3 or 4. Oh yeah, he's gonna turn 4. He's gonna turn 4 this month. Or next month. Oh, hey, Lynn. Here he comes. Hey, Miles. Come to say hi? Come to greet your loyal fans? Now, Miles had just turned 1 at the time of the first tours. And now he's about to turn 4. So we are right up on our 3rd anniversary of tours. That'll be end of next month. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll save the political recaps for Whiskey and a Cookie on Friday night. Once again, for now, make sure you're on the mailing list if you want to know about upcoming tours. This Wednesday night, we're doing Strange Tales of the Gold Coast, one of my favorites that we haven't done in quite a long time. And next week, we're going to do the virtual boat tour, which we haven't done in a long time either now that I look at it. We've done a couple. We've done one in person, of course. And also coming soon, Mysterious Chicago Dinners. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. And once again, I keep hearing from people, hey, we loved your tours during the pandemic. You should still do them. We're still here every day, everybody. So thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, if at all practically possible, stay spooky, everybody.